So it's like, how do you like plug back in? Like how do you like move with the culture, move I mean, like, and I guess it's like the balancing too of what I think we were even talking about before hitting record, but like the ability to connect with your people, right? And really understand those who help me process, those who, right? Even like in the Me Time program, we talk about like energy vampires and then
Hmm.
energy builders, and whether it's environments or people or tasks on kind of controlling that. And so it's like almost that's a positive thing to be able to control. But then you over control and you kind of take yourself out of life almost.
And I'm smiling because there's one more piece in our little daisy chain that we need to connect before we get to the solution. So
Okay.
it started with we're just afraid right now. Things are just really stressful and chaotic. We talked about being able to have grace because we recognize that there are social constructs that each of us have a different perspective and a different take on how life should look like. And as a result, we all have different priorities, which that's where grace comes in. We are recognizing that COVID and that time of isolation really encouraged us to be isolating and to take control of our little bubble. The last thing, and this is actually tying into kind of what you had emailed about, which is if we're going to be talking about grief, and I think grief is somewhat part of the conversation, but the bigger part is anxiety. And
Mm,
at its core, anxiety is the loss of control. When we had our bubble in place, when we were able to kind of decide what food was coming to our house and who was visiting and making sure that we were able to casually say, "Sorry, you didn't quarantine, so I can't see you for the next 2 years." Now someone is coming up to my front door and knocking and saying, "I'm coming in whether you like it or not." That's anxiety provoking. And right now, again, tying into something has pierced our bubble, something that we cannot control is going to happen. And that is where anxiety comes in because we're all
mhm,
just nervous. We're scared. We're freaked out in different levels. I'm not trying to qualify or quantify anyone's anxiety, but I think that at its core is what we're all experiencing right now. And because he doesn't come into office until January 20th, we're not even sure what we're going to be grieving just yet. But in this moment, it's fear, it's scare, it's sad, it's all these things, but it can still kind of come down to that I don't have control. I am anxious. And I
mhm.
think once we're able to identify that emotion, then we're able to start coming up with action plans. And I'm curious if you kind of see it the same way or if maybe I'm missing the mark when I'm kind of I feel like I'm generalizing it, but would be curious what you think about that.
Yeah, well, Liz, that's amazing. I don't think I've ever identified before as even feeling anxious unless it was a situation where Lucy was presenting with like very significant health outcomes. But as you just presented anxiety as that way, in the sense of it's the lack or fear of loss of control,
Hmm.
that just like hits. And it's like, I love that idea of the inquiry of just even saying like, I feel like I'm losing control and kind of letting that live in the space of anxiety was like, wow, like as you were just talking, I'm like,
Yeah.
holy cow, you are anxious. Like aligns up with all the genetics, right? Like
Yeah.
how are Sarah, how are you the lone wolf who experienced all this anxiety like all around in your family? Oh, woman, you didn't. You just tried to transfer it to just this like you are good at control. You are very good at problem solving, but it's like what's behind that? What's driving that? And I think it really truly is like a fundamental,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, to not overburden the concept of anxiety, right? Like to not
Yes.
pathologize pathologize
Pathologize. Yeah.
yeah, and to turn it into an ICD code. Like I think
Yeah.
that's like almost freeing because it is like the recognition, letting it sit, but then also
Mhm.
understanding that then seeking behavior of
Yes.
saying, and through this control or this busyness, right? Even
Mhm.
as we were talking before about just like the busyness, is it that productivity, that progress seeking coming from like a place when you actually are feeling most out of control?
You're trying to
And
find order.
yeah, And it's funny, Liz, like whether you even think about it in terms of like, you know, in something like a negative outcome. So like whether it's like, a health outcome or like Lucy's surgery in the spring or an election outcome or like a job outcome, or even like when you think about, I guess what also came to mind of like when you're kind of seeking control when there's like room for growth, right? Or like accomplishment, because like when I'm at work working more with leaders who are scaling up, it's almost like they need all their ducks in a row. And it's like this, and I don't meet, right? Even looking at the job requisitions of like, oh, I don't need this and that. And it's like this kind of, what do I need? What type of degree do I need next to be able to be eligible for this? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh no, you just slow down. Like you're doing it. Tell me, and tell me more. So it's interesting too on like where it can show up in both kind of a positive space, but then also a period of growth. So yeah, absolutely what you said resonates in terms of anxiety coming from
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback what you were saying, also, I would say I am not prepared to say everyone has anxiety
no.
disorder. It's like just like someone can go through a moment of depression when they're feeling something, but it does not necessarily mean that they have a depressive disorder. Anxiety is a natural emotion. If I think any human being
There
at
we go.
one time or other feels anxious, and the biggest key about talking about it right now is just being able to put that finger on it so we now can actually come up with some actionable items to help us combat it. If we are saying, that's not me, I don't have that problem. And I know a lot of people are afraid of, going to a therapist or doing any of those things. So I get it. And I'm not at all trying to say that everyone needs a therapist, although, they're welcome. But what I'm trying to say is that it is part of the emotional experience. And for some, this may be a feeling that they've never felt before. And that's why it feels so constricting and so overwhelming. But the reality is, this is something that is understandable. It's understandable that we have been maintaining control for a very long time. We're starting to lose it a little bit. And it feels like it's overwhelming, but this is now where we start talking about those tools. And you have started to kind of say, what can we do? And I think that's where both of us come in handy for stuff like that, because this is kind of the stuff that we talk about. Like, what are the things that we could do to get us to that space where we can at least just get to a place where it's not in control, but we can at least kind of take a breath and ride the roller coaster for just a minute.
Absolutely. I think just even like the phrase or whatever, like naming it to tame it, right? And just
Yep.
being able to, and what's interesting to me, I mean, even just through this, like saying, oh yeah, that's anxiety, Sarah. Like it really is when you think about
Hmm.
it that simply, and not, I guess it's the balance too of giving it space and then also kind of like not just claiming that as this is my identity. I'm an anxious person.
Yeah.
Like I can't help it.